Hello, everybody. Great, I think we're just waiting for people to trickle in. I'm Laurence Watson. I'll be moderating the panels today. We've got a really fun session today. Climate change, can tech help save the planet? Of course it can. We've got some really fun speakers today for a range of really interesting companies. And I hope, it'll be a stimulating load of lightning talks, and then we'll have a panel discussion and some questions. So think of questions as people are talking, and there'll be plenty of time to bring them up later on. So I will be kicking us off talking about Subak, which is a new non-profit accelerator that helps organizations that are tackling climate change through data and tech. We've got Arne Kaetelhoen from Carbon Mines. We have James Hand, who's the co-founder of Geeky. We've got Angus and Victoria from HarkSys. So I will just get on and do my talk. So hopefully you can all see my screen. All right, so Subak is, as I said, an accelerator and a data cooperative for climate non-profits. So in some ways, we're so the accelerator part, we fund directly non-profits. We have a £70,000 grant, and we have a learning program to scale up, to take organizations that are already working in the space. We don't really mind exactly what part of the vertical they're in, and we want them to scale up. We want them to be able to pitch for much larger funding amounts. We want them to have a very clear theory of change of how what they're doing today will actually have a climate impact. And then we want them to be able to build the team, to build the organization to achieve those goals. And the data cooperative part of it, I'll come on to. But part of the rationale for Subak existing was that there's a huge amount of effort going into the for-profit space. There's a huge amount of money going into climate tech, but there are some things that are maybe, arguably, we would say, better solved from the actions of non-profits. And of course, non-profit groups traditionally have been campaigning groups and sort of think tanks, but we feel that there's a huge amount that the non-profit sector can learn from the tech sector. So bringing in the latest in terms of technology, in terms of AI and machine learning, in terms of marketing and targeting, in terms of how to influence policy, all of this stuff is necessary and needed to really make a difference. So that was the sort of philosophical thoughts behind it. And so a lot of the people involved have come from the tech sector. We have Steve Crossan on the board, who's from Google. Michelle Yu is one of our board members who founded Songkick. So again, all of these people who've sort of done it and scaled businesses, then coming into the non-profit. So I mentioned the accelerator. I think that's fairly clear. We also have an individuals program for fellows. So we have a £10,000 grant for individuals. And in some ways, that's like a sort of feeder program for the accelerator. So if someone isn't quite ready, doesn't have their idea quite done, we'll support them develop it. Or they could just be working around a certain bit of climate data. They could be filling a gap that needs work. The second part is this data cooperative. So what that means is three things. We hope to build a community of sort of like-minded people who are using, consuming, producing climate data for their work, whether it's the for-profit, as some of our other panelists are, or it's the sort of non-profit sector. It's a code of practice, and it's really rooted in open source and sharing. And we think that by sharing and collaborating, that will have a sort of benefit for the commons, that will benefit everyone. And a lot of stuff that we know is just sits on the shelf. A lot of people have this data, but because they are unsure either how to license it effectively or what the benefit is for them, it never ends up being shared or being used. So we want to address that with sort of guidance and help going within organizations. And then the third part is sort of what's the tech infrastructure we need to deliver those changes within a data cooperative. So we're building a catalog, a sort of web portal that will showcase lots of different climate data. Now, there's quite a lot of those already. There's loads of different data portals. We hope it'll be a bit different by having mechanisms for user feedback, so we can tie data sets to code that people have used to transform it, so it's a bit richer, and also to do a lot of work on interconnection. So to make it really clear where different data sets come from and how they're connected, even sort of within data set levels, sort of at an entity level, like a row level, so that you could start to do really advanced kinds of queries. If Subak sounds like a weird name or an unusual name, we have borrowed it or taken it from Bali, from the Indonesian water management system from the 9th century, which was around how communities would share the sort of communal resource of water. And in our analogy, the water of climate change is the data. If we can't measure things, if we don't have the sort of fundamental building block to do analysis, then we really can't do anything. So that led us to saying we would be a climate Subak, a sort of collective system for managing our climate data. So we have a 4-stream accelerator around data and tech, which I manage. I'm head of tech. And I should say, I suppose my background is 10 years with nonprofits and increasingly data science. I've spoken at a few of these data science festivals. It's always a great pleasure and always amazing people and excellent questions. So I manage the sort of data and tech and sort of data science side of that in terms of skilling up teams or addressing their needs, which are very, very varied, whether it's sort of helping them with sort of machine learning tasks or with just deployment or setting up a web service or website. The other program streams are fundamentals, being an effective organization, market, which again, there's a lot of sort of marketing and understanding the market. So I think there's a lot of like product mindset benefit that can be useful in this space. You know, if you want to have a climate impact, who is your user, who is your audience, what is your, you know, your market size, what's your path to winning in your space? And then policy, and again, a huge amount of stuff, and I'll be interested to get our other panelists' thoughts on this later on, but a lot of the market conditions are set up and defined and controlled by policies, by decisions from governments, from subsidies to incentive mechanisms, and often climate change is described as, you know, a big market failure, that the externality of climate change, the cost of carbon pollution isn't priced in. So to what extent do we need policy change to enable whatever tech innovation we've done, and how can we use data and data science to inform policy and to make better policy decisions? Open data I've covered, data cooperative I've covered. Yeah, we want to, in terms of my ask to you and to the public and to everybody, we want people to think about what kinds of data they use and how it could be made more open and connected, and also what data that would be really helpful for them. And so we are doing an exploratory sort of piece of work where we speak to all sorts of different kinds of stakeholders. So if that speaks to you at all, then do drop me a nudge afterwards. Yeah, so the accelerator I've covered, the flow. We want to make it in a, you know, we know that climate change is a huge problem that needs rapid action. So we've designed it, the Subak, with design as an organization to be a sort of internationally scaling. So we have a group in Australia who are starting a Subak hub in Australia. We're in talks with the US, but we think stuff needs to happen absolutely everywhere. So we need to be able to scale to meet that challenge as quickly as possible. Scaling obviously is a key sort of business challenge for organizations as well. And again, with climate, like, you know, we have a sort of 50 gigatons of carbon emissions every year. Like it's scaling up these solutions that is a huge part of the challenge, and ensuring the incentives are right and the models actually can scale. So that's a question we spend a lot of time thinking about. And then just briefly on our members, and then I'll wrap up and move on to the next speaker. We have 5 really exciting organizations that we're supporting at the moment. New Automotive, Open Climate Fix, Ember, Transition Zero, and Climate Policy Radar. And Open Climate Fix, which you may have heard of, are using AI machine learning for solar power forecasting. Transition Zero using satellite images to monitor industrial emissions in places like China and turn that into sort of financial metrics. Ember are tracking coal power and the transition away from coal to clean energy. So their data supplies our world in data and Statista, people like that. New Automotive are tracking electric vehicle uptake in the UK, and we've got 30 million light duty passenger vehicles that need to become electric over 20 years. Climate Policy Radar are doing lots of sort of deep learning and NLP to classify the world's policy documents. So they're building this huge corpus of climate policy laws even at a subnational level, and doing some very nice NLP stuff to turn that into sort of actionable insights. So that's it, a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what Subak is. But yeah, if you or anyone you know is interested in starting or getting involved in a non-profit using data to fight climate, then do look us up. So I'll come to a stop there. And I will call upon our next speaker, which I believe is James, who's the co-founder. Is that right? No, excuse me. I'm speaker 0, and speaker 1 is Arne Kaetelhoen, who is the MD and co-founder at Carbon Minds, and I'll let him introduce himself. Over to you, Arne, and we'll all speak a little bit later. So out for me for now.
Sounds perfect. Thanks so much, Laurence, for this this exciting talk. And I really like your initiative, and I like the story behind the name of it. So nice idea. Yeah, man, thanks everyone for being here and for taking the time. I'm Arne Kaetelhoen. I'm the CEO of Carbon Minds. And Carbon Minds is a data analytics company and a life cycle data provider based in Cologne. So it's a type of data that you would need for environmental assessment on a product level, on a corporate level, over the entire life cycle. And our story basically starts here. 1.5 degrees Celsius, the international climate target. If we want to achieve this target, we need a huge transition away from carbon-intensive infrastructure to its new and more sustainable technology. And this transition has already very concrete challenges for the industry right now. First of all, companies need to start understanding their climate impact. They need to report it, and they need to reduce it in order to stay attractive to their customers, to their investors, and often even to their own employees. But this is quite challenging because when you think of a company, you will first think of their own chimneys, of their own emissions, but these direct emissions, they are only a tiny part of the emissions that a company or a product causes, while the by far larger part is hidden in the supply chain, both up and downstream. So basically the extraction of raw materials, all the production steps within your supply chain, how your product is used, and so on. And as you can imagine, these supply chains, they stretch over many different countries, different companies. There are hundreds and sometimes, yeah, really a lot of production steps involved. And getting this data, it's difficult. And the Science-Based Targets Initiative for climate targets, it recently published a report where they talked to a lot of companies, and they found out that the low availability and quality of supply chain data is the single largest barrier, in this case for the chemical industry, in order to even start setting climate targets. And this is something that we are trying to change at Carbon Minds, specifically for the chemical industry. So what we did is basically to collect this data. We collected data on where the industry is located, because the production location, it will determine the local supply chains, the energy mixes, everything. For every plant along the entire supply chain, we needed to understand what is the exact technology that is used in the plant. You can produce chemicals in many different ways often. How does its technology work? What are the inputs, the outputs, the emissions, and so on? And how do chemicals move around the globe? So what are the international trade flows? And we used this data and to build basically a model, a digital model of the global chemical industry, a so-called bottom-up model. And this model is built in a way that is basically covers more than 190 regions, pretty much everywhere where chemicals are produced. We specifically model 2,500 individual suppliers, and I need to change this number, by now more than 18,000 individual production plants. And this model, it's built in a way so that it's compliant with the major environmental reporting standards, including the standards for life cycle assessment and corporate accounting. So using this model, we can now analyze the difference in climate impacts of chemicals per different countries. So what I've got here is the example of polypropylene that might be your keyboard of your computer right now. And what you can see here in the small world map, it's that the impact depends quite a lot on where it's developed. So there's a factor 4 between the cleanest and the most polluting production region. But we can even dig deeper, and we are, what we know, the first and currently only company that systematically can calculate product carbon footprints and environmental impacts in general for all the different suppliers in the market. And this is this graph in the upper right corner, and you can see for polypropylene in China, for example, there's a factor 10 between the cleanest and the most polluting supplier. So why is it important to have this data? First of all, for reporting, you got just get more precise. So what is out there at the moment is a lot of country average data. With this data, you can really choose your supplier, and the impact might be very different from your actual impact. And with our data, you can really model your real impact along the supply chain. But maybe even more importantly, you can use this data in order to become more sustainable and choose more sustainable suppliers. As I showed you, this is again the example, there's often a factor 10 in between the climate impacts of different suppliers, and these suppliers, they often even have similar prices, and they might be located just a few kilometers away. So by using our data, companies can really pick a supplier mix that can drive down their supply chain emissions. And we believe that this can have a very strong transitional effect on the industry, because sustainable production, you get benefits from it. More people might choose you, and it gets more transparent how companies do in terms of sustainability. Our data is already trusted by some of the largest companies in the world, some of the top 5 companies in oil and gas, chemicals and tech, and of course leading producers in the chemical industry. And why should they trust us? I think what is important for us is that we don't only say that this data works, we also want to prove it. So the entire database is certified by a huge certification company. There's annual monitoring of the data, and we are set up with roots in academia. So we also use the data, showcase applications in journals. So this month we had a publication in Science, last year in PNAS, in order to show what it's worth. And I think this quality assurance is super needed in climate reporting, where there's a lot of greenwashing going on, and this is super needed for all of us to get closer to this, so 1.5 degrees Celsius. If you have any questions, I'm looking forward to the session. We have a Q&A in the end. But for now, I would first like to hand over to the next speaker, and this is James Hand from the company Geeky. James, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you very much indeed. That actually ties quite nicely into what I'm going to talk about. That's at the company level, and I want to talk about the individual and the role that they have. So you all have heard so much during COP26 about the necessity of keeping 1.5 alive, and that means that this decade we've got to cut emissions in half. That means that we've all got to do things differently. And that means companies need to provide lower carbon products and services, as Arne was just highlighting. But what's a lot less known is that 70% of emissions come from us, from individuals. And that means that in order to limit the worst effects of climate change, we all have to do things differently. And that's what we're tackling at Geeky. So Geeky stands for Get Informed, Know Your Impact. We're a social enterprise that was set up in 2017 by myself and also my wife, Jo, who previously worked at the Carbon Disclosure Project. And our mission is to help people understand their own carbon footprint and then show them what they can do to reduce it. In the UK at the moment, the average carbon footprint per person is around 9 tons. By 2030, that needs to be 2.5 tons. For people in America, the average carbon footprint is about 16 tons. By 2030, that needs to be 2.5 tons. So there are huge savings that we all need to make. And what we really want to show people is what they can do. And there are so many things that people can do to reduce their carbon footprint, but it becomes quite a tough data exercise, because in order to work out what you personally can do, we need to know information about you. For example, what flights you might take, how you heat your home, the type of diet that you have, what goods and services you buy and use. And it's only with the provision of that information that we can use the data to help people understand what they can do in their lives to make a difference. So we've mapped out about 130 different things that an individual can take globally, but it's all about what they can do, which ones of those work for them as individuals. The way that we do that is we actually link up with organizations who want to engage their members or their staff on ways to cut carbon. So we actually work with everybody from small villages, church groups, community groups, all the way up to global companies like Deloitte, NatWest, and big universities like the University of Oxford and the University of York. Now, what we're seeing is that the better we can provide information to people, the more personalized it is, the better it is, because people don't really want to know about the thousands and thousands of variables that go into us working out what their carbon footprint is. What they want to know is what they can do today for perhaps a quick win, or what they can do over the next year to have a really big impact. So that's what we're currently doing at the moment, working with companies, engaging staff. And one of the very exciting things and very much needed things is that over the last 12 months, there has been a huge change in people's willingness to think about what they can do differently in their lives, as well as what policymakers can do to help them. So with that, I'll now pass on to our next speakers, Victoria and Angus.
Thank you very much, James. That was very interesting. I'd be very keen to have a look at your tool and see what it would pick up on my behalf. But hello, everybody. My name is Angus, and today me and my colleague Victoria will be talking about effective consumption control and why that's important. First, just a quick intro. As I said, my name's Angus, and I'm a data scientist at HARC. So my experience is in maths, analysis, and sustainability, and generally I use data to identify energy savings opportunities.
Hi, I'm Victoria, and I'm also a data scientist at HARC, and I come from an engineering background. So before working at HARC, I undertook a PhD, which looked at improving the energy efficiency of manufacturing buildings. So at HARC, I spend my time developing tools to help uncover insights from data and drive energy savings. So today I'll start off giving an overview of what we do at HARC and the problems within the industry regarding energy waste. And then following this, Angus will give a more technical example of a particular method that we can use to help businesses control their energy. So about HARC, our mission statement is to improve efficiency, maximize yield, and reduce waste with an overall aim of improving the way the world performs. So HARC helps enterprises do this by connecting to providing visibility of and automatically controlling assets, such as energy meters, building management systems, and industrial systems. So the HARC platform can securely stream your data from your entire estate at an asset-specific level and analyze that data in real time, providing actionable information. So our platform's user interface can allow for tailored views and custom dashboards, which can reduce the time spent to searching for performance reports and insights into consumption. So whilst there are many good tools to analyze business data, today there are very few tools which can provide an easy way to connect to systems and provide this information simply in a single place. So this ultimately means there is potential for efficiency and asset optimizations, which can go unnoticed and cost valuable time and money. So here's an example of how we can provide custom dashboards for customers using HARC analytics and energy tools. So any industry standard sensor can connect to our platform, offering a plug-and-play solution for rapid deployments. So at HARC, we are backed by partners such as Arm, Microsoft, and Dell, and we work with two of the UK's top 4 retailers. HARC has saved one of the UK's top retailers over £1 million in 2019. And in January 2020, we saved enough energy to power 35 homes for a year, or 24 million mobile phones. So on to the topic of energy. What does the current energy scene look like overall and in the industrial sector? So overall, 54% of energy produced in the UK is wasted. This is equivalent to power produced from 37 nuclear plants or wind turbines covering 40% of Scotland. On an organisational level, the Carbon Trust states that typically 20% of all businesses' annual energy costs are wasted through the use of inefficient equipment. So just think about how much money could be saved if each and every organisation could cut 20% of their annual bill. Also, the industrial sector consumes around 16% of the UK's energy. We also have a goal of achieving an 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. So by adopting tools and techniques to monitor assets and energy efficiency, this can hold huge potential to reap energy savings and increase the efficiency of high energy consuming equipment. So how can we reduce all this wasted energy and improve the efficiency of our systems? Well, firstly, energy monitoring is key. So energy monitoring is a process of tracking, recording and visualizing energy consumption, which can be across an entire facility or right down to a single asset. The continuous monitoring of energy consumption can allow us to recognize patterns in system behavior and allows us to determine expected performance of systems. We can identify trends and detect when an asset is not operating efficiently. So this can be anything from a system running faster or at a higher temperature than required, or not being turned off at a specific time. So this sounds great, but when we're faced with an asset in a state full of assets, whether that's hundreds or thousands of assets, monitoring all our systems can become overwhelming and pretty much near impossible to prioritize which assets may need attention. So by automating this process, we can automatically keep track of our assets, learn their behavior and automatically recognize when an asset is not operating efficiently. We can also prioritize which assets may need attention, which can allow our energy managers to focus on assets which can provide the greatest efficiency savings. So onto the big question, how do we actually automate these processes and automate these alerting systems and asset prioritization? So I'll pass you on to Angus, who can tell you more.
Thanks very much, Victoria. As she was saying, it's very important to automate this process. And one of the ways that we can look to do that is by creating a prediction interval. This interval is capable of learning the behaviors of assets and can be used to identify any readings that look suspicious. This kind of data science problem is generally classified as regression. So when we're doing regression, typically we focus on predicting values, but there are techniques to predict intervals instead. Predicting values we can imagine as the red line on the left and an interval being the shaded area on the right. One of the ways that we can predict an interval is by training models on quantiles of the data. So if we look at a gradient boosting regressor model, which is quite a commonly used model in regression, typically we would use least squares as a loss function. This predicts the mean and penalizes low and high errors equally. However, what we can do is use quantile loss as a loss function. This penalizes errors differently, so it's based on whether the error was positive or negative, and allows the model to optimize for percentiles. So for example, looking at the red dashed line on the right, which is a 95% quantile, the red cross would have a higher error than the green cross. Now, even though the red cross is closer to the optimized line, the fact that it's under the line, the fact that the green cross is under the line contributes more to the error score. So how do we actually achieve generating prediction intervals? It's very easy to do in sklearn. The way that we'll have to do it is by training two individual models, one on the upper quantile and one on the lower quantile. You can see the alpha value on line 2, which corresponds to the size of the quantile as a percentage. So on line 2, the lower alpha value is equal to about 5%, the top 95th percentile, and the bottom value, the upper alpha value, is equal to 95%. So in total, we cover about 90% of the data within this interval. If we use the gradient boosting regressor model, as I mentioned previously, we can quite easily set this the loss function and the alpha values just as parameters, as you can see on line 7. And then train the models using the code on lines 14 and 15. We could also configure a third model to estimate the median value. So this would show 50% of the readings above the line and 50% below, and would generally give us an idea of how the data is distributed. So what does a real world example look like? Here we can see the results of the two models from the previous screen. So the top of the shaded blue area is the upper model, and the bottom of the shaded blue area is the lower model. The black scatter points is the test data, so the data that the model's never come into contact with before. On this graph, we have 2 days worth of data, the black scatter points, and this represents minutely energy demand in kilowatts of a bakery. So bakeries tend to turn on early in the day, usually just before 6 o'clock, as you can see, and then they peter out towards just after dinner time. So once we get past midday, we can see that the demand starts dropping towards zero. So now that we've got that information and we can see it plotted, what can we actually infer from this graph? There's two main things in my opinion. The first one on day one, if we look just after midday, we can see at about 3 o'clock, we have a spike in consumption, and these points don't actually fit within the prediction interval. So maybe somebody needed to do some extra baking, or maybe something had been left turned on. Regardless of what's caused it though, I'm sure an energy manager would be keen to sort of investigate exactly what's caused it. Secondly, on day two, if we look at the right-hand side of the graph now, the bakery seemed to turn on around 2 hours after the prediction interval expected it to. So that's why you can see that sort of empty shaded blue area just before 6 a.m. Now, a situation like this doesn't necessarily mean that energy's been wasted, but if the bakery was timed to cooperate with other assets like ventilation or heating, then it may not be running optimally. There may be waste energy generated. Similarly, the energy managers could have configured this to come on during before 6 a.m. because the price per kilowatt hour is lowest. So it's an opportunity to shift load and save money. Hopefully that makes sense, and you can see how a tool that produces a graph as simple as the one on your screen can sort of prove invaluable to energy experts. I think nowadays we've got tons of data available to us, and the real problem is producing meaningful insights. So a methodology as simple as this can allow you to automatically identify energy wastage and hopefully reduce some of the emissions that Victoria mentioned previously. Thanks for listening, everybody. I think we're going to go to questions now. Is that correct? I'm going to open up to the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Angus, Victoria. That was awesome. Yeah, I think everyone do turn your videos on, and please, everyone, do get some questions in the Q&A box. That was really cool. Yeah, really enjoyed all of those. And Angus and Victoria, thanks so much for bringing the bakery context, because I was really keen to understand, what are the assets that you're optimizing? Like, what sort of things are you trying to do this prediction on? So bakeries, I guess, other kinds of commercial venues.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a wide range of different assets that we work with. It's not limited to bakeries, but anything that you can imagine that you'd find in a factory or a supermarket: fridges, freezers, lightings, HVAC systems, that kind of stuff. Yeah, cool. Very cool. And thank you to James, and thank you, Arne, as well. And I called you the wrong surname as well, Arne, so double apologies for that. So, I mean, why don't we just do some general questions for now, and then we can dive into some specific ones for each of your talks. But I mean, I guess, yeah, like the big picture at the moment, as James mentioned, is COP26 is going on, like huge international effort to try and coordinate around faster, better targets across, huge amounts of different sectors. I mean, how do you all see the barriers in terms of climate data? How do you think tech can play a part? Give us your opinions in terms of the big picture. Arne, over to you.
I think that's a really good question. So when a company would like to engage in climate action, it doesn't mean that they can start right away. So often they don't even know where their hotspots are, how the potentials are in order to improve their climate performance. And I think here data comes into place. We saw cool solutions like how you can optimize your operations within the company, and you find data for your supply chains. And I think both is super important. And in terms of Glasgow, maybe one thing is that the data needs to be trustful. So I'm not sure how many climate pledges you saw over the last 2 months. Basically, everyone comes up with a net zero pledge or with reduction targets. I think it's really important to look behind what they mean with this, behind these buzzwords, and see what is meant and get to a standardization, how we generate our data so that we can support net zero claims or climate impact reduction claims.
Nice. James, you've got a view, and yours is sort of about individual data as well, I suppose. Now we're in sort of slightly different buckets, aren't we? Because as well with the pledges, like Arne just said, there's sort of pledges that countries make and share with other people. There's companies that use their own data to improve their own performance, like Angus and Victoria are probably doing. Like that data is mostly not public, right? And then James, you've got sort of individuals' data that again they can use for their own to improve their own sort of actions and decision making, or maybe share as well. I don't know, but I think it's useful to draw that distinction.
Yeah, and I think it also shows sort of the point we're at now, which is that each of those areas, the policy from the governments, the companies and the individuals, everybody needs to be doing everything as quickly as they can. And yeah, data has to be a really important part of that in sort of two big buckets. The first one's like the measurement bucket. So yeah, we've seen lots of pledges at COP. In particular, the headline grabbers have been around the methane pledge and also the deforestation pledge. Both of those need really good measurement to know, are we actually on track? What are methane emissions at the moment? That's not that has a very wide estimation error. And what's actually happening in terms of deforestation? Is it, where is it growing? Where is it shrinking? So, and this week, one of the big sort of technical areas of discussion at COP was around something called the global stock take, which is around, well, how much carbon dioxide equivalents is actually being emitted. So for countries, for companies, for individuals, a massive sort of part of measuring it, so we can actually then move on to the next bit, which is the insight. Right, what are we actually going to do about it? Because there are some things that are really straightforward that every individual, as an example, should be doing, like around waste. They're wasting money, they're wasting carbon, they're generating too much plastic pollution. And then they're much harder ones where the data, the evidence base is harder for people to understand, especially if it involves sort of long-term investment, like in something like a heat pump or even an EV. So yeah, for me, data is actually crucial, but certainly for our market as well. It's not just the data. If we show people lots of data, they basically think it's noise. What we've got to do is show people data that's also a story, that brings it to life, that makes it relevant to them, because that's when they kind of take it from just being sort of information on a page to something that's actually actionable.
Nice. And James, can I just stay with you before I go over to Angus and Victoria? But I'd love to hear more about, in terms of the personal decision making that you can help inform. What would be the top things that Geeky might suggest? Or I mean, can you give a bit more colour to, what if I sign up to Geeky? What would happen? What would I do differently?
Sure. So the short version of that is everybody's a bit different. It depends on what you're doing in the first place. But that's kind of a key part of the process, to kind of ask some questions to get people kind of that initial idea of what is their carbon footprint. And it's from that we can then start to come up with some suggestions. So as an example, somebody in the UK who eats a sort of a fairly normal, typical diet, the carbon footprint of that diet will be over 2 tons per annum. By 2030, we will need to be at 2.5. And that percentage of it can't come from just what we eat. So for someone like that, it would be around, well, what can they do to basically start eating more plants? Not making the full leap to vegan. It's very, very few people, number of people do that, but showing them the information for the various things they can do to kind of get them on that road. Conversely, if someone's like an extremely big flyer, particularly long haul flying, then we'll show sort of some examples of what they can do like that. But so far, we found for everybody, there's something that they can do, often starting with the small stuff, the quick wins. And we don't shy away from the fact that the quick wins aren't going to solve climate change, but they're good for behavior change. And then moving them gradually to the really important, impactful stuff, covering in particular kind of how you heat and electrify your home, the food that you eat, and how you get around. Those are the big components of almost everybody's carbon footprint.
Great. And yeah, Mohammed's asked, what about trucking? Although that's probably not for individuals getting around. I mean, my take is the consensus is that heavy transport will be either from hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or maybe electric trucks as well, though it's still sort of not quite sure. I don't know if anyone else has got a hot take on what's going to happen to trucking, but Angus and Victoria, yeah, what's your take on sort of COP26 in Glasgow? And then also I'd love to know in that context about how can your work, like how scalable is it, or what are the barriers that stops companies sort of, adopting this for every kind of energy using asset? I mean, are there barriers, or can you just, start using the models that you're doing anywhere?
I think one of the barriers is how different all of the different assets communicate with each other. So there's a wide range of different standards that are used to actually send data between different assets and services. One of our strengths is that we can connect to a very wide range of legacy systems, as well as current systems, and we sort of pride ourselves on no matter what the asset, we'll be able to hook up to it and get data out of it. So I think one of the limitations is definitely struggling to get data out of difficult systems, but there are ways to do it. And similarly, alongside that, when you do get the data out of certain systems, it's a question of making the haystack bigger and not actually finding the needle. So it is a very big question of automating this process and helping people understand exactly where they can save carbon and money, rather than just giving them another job to do and giving them another exercise to do on a weekly basis and analyze the data, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it's a case as well of sort of being able to be really clear on your what and why, what are your end goals and what do you actually want to analyze and why, so you can make the most from your data, because there seems to be sort of a big buzzword around Industry 4.0, let's hook everything up to sensors, put everything in the cloud, all this kind of thing. But if you don't really understand what your end goal is, then that's a sort of question that you really need to figure out, and then you can really use your data to make actionable insights and really make the changes to sort of improve your carbon footprint.
That makes sense. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for your answers. I think there's a thread around sort of policy and like standards is sort of how do you ensure that everyone is using the same standards, right? And that comes across a lot of what we've said. Arne, there's a question for you. George says for carbon mines, some regions 10 times worse than others. I think that was for your polypropylene in manufacturing in China, which, yeah, blew my mind as well. So, yeah, what does the Chinese government and the provinces think about this? Do they even know?
Yeah, and that's a good question. The factor 10 in the polypropylene example was not even for the region, it was for individual suppliers. So sometimes you just walk a few kilometers and you will come from the most sustainable supplier in the country to the worst one. Why is this the case? The case is that China is using a lot of coal for chemical production, and you might know the discussion from the energy sector. Coal is more dirty. Of course, in the chemical industry, it's not used for energy, or also, but no, in this case, not used for energy production, but as a feedstock to put it into your chemical. But the bottom line is the same. So if you use coal, your impact gets high. Is this data known? So far, if you look into most other environmental databases, on a life cycle level, it's often not known. So it's more aggregated. There are rest of the world regions where it's in there, where maybe some energy mixes has changed. So within the industry, I think sometimes this comes as a news. Within the country, I'm not the Chinese government, so I can't tell. I assume that they have super good analysts there, and maybe someone else on the panel knows it, but I think the announcement is that there's a continuation by 2030, and then something has happened, but in terms of cuts in emissions, but maybe someone else in this panel has followed this closely. So my take would be, I assume that that they are aware of it, but I cannot see very much immediate action for the coal use.
Really interesting. Anthony has asked around sort of guidance to get involved in data science oriented climate stuff, which comes off a lot, and I think it would be really interesting actually to hear from everyone. How did you get to where you are? I think you're all doing, you know, work that impacts on the climate problem. It's something that comes up a lot for us at Subak with people wanting to volunteer. So I'll maybe answer last, but yeah, to everyone, maybe James, Arne, and then Angus and Victoria. How did you end up doing the work that you're doing, and you know what was the story, briefly, with the idea that it will be useful for someone thinking about trying to get involved?
Yeah, so I actually worked in finance for 20 years before I started Geeky. I was in quantitative finance in particular, and then sort of ESG investing as well, environmental, social, and governance investing. As I mentioned, my wife was at the Carbon Disclosure Project, and so it was that combination of me being a big fan of how data can help tell stories, and my wife sort of focuses on the fact that basically we're all screwed if we don't do something. That was the kind of the combination that sat behind starting up Geeky. And we've been very lucky along the way actually to have been helped by quite a lot of volunteers, people that come in and sort of are very generous with their time, and that's helped us move forward on a number of projects that we wouldn't have been able to do anyway. And I think quite a lot of other companies like ours in the space really benefit from that, both what you learn, how it can help you accelerate. Also, though, candidly, it's a process you have to manage quite actively as a company. Many volunteers often they're incredible people, so much to give. But when you've also got deadlines of businesses, you've got to work out how to balance the two of them. But yeah, I think there are loads of opportunities out there for people.
Arne, how about you?
I think that maybe it was also that I was confronted with the demand. I've been leading a research team at Aachen University. It's about 15 PhD students, and we've been doing environmental assessments for chemical and energy industries. And we've just been looking for data a lot, and we didn't find it. So at some point, we started modeling it ourselves. We got better at it. We modeled maybe 100 processes, and we thought, wait, using the same method, maybe we can also model 100,000, and this is what we did in the end in Carbon 9. So it's a spin-off from this group.
Nice. Angus, Victoria?
My background is in sustainability analysis. So I work for a company helping to identify, using data to help identify opportunities to save energy and save carbon. I found that very interesting, and then I wanted to take my sort of analytical and mathematical capabilities to the next step, and decided to start educating myself about different data science methods and try and push myself on a bit further with my programming and that kind of stuff. And I made the jump to move to HARC. And at the time that I joined HARC, we mainly focused on we did a lot of focus on life sciences. So we used our technology and our platform to increase visibility of temperatures of labs, and also create audit logs to make sure that drugs that were being kept in a fridge were constant and weren't falling outside of their sort of agreed tolerance bounds and that kind of thing. So we found that also applied very well to energy and helping businesses reduce their energy bill and understand their energy bill. And it's been very interesting for me personally to follow that sort of transition from one application of the technology to a different area. But if I had to give some advice on how to get into helping out with climate change, it would be just get into data science, get into analytics. There's so many opportunities out there. There's so many free resources online to help educate yourself. There's Kaggle competitions, all that kind of stuff that you can join and really develop your skill set into something that can help. And data science and sustainability is only getting bigger. So.
Victoria?
Well, I started more in the academic space. So I did a PhD in energy analysis for manufacturing facilities. So I started off mainly research in the energy sector because it's such a sort of rapidly advancing, the research in energy is so sort of rapidly advancing because of all these pressures. So we want to be carbon neutral and all that kind of thing. All these pressures are sort of really pushing the research. I decided to join HARC because I wanted to be able to apply the things that I developed during my PhD to a sort of more real world environment. So that's when I joined HARC last year. So in terms of advice, as well as what Angus said, develop the skills in data science. One of the things that I found really useful is to do that in sort of like a collaborative environment as well. So a lot of cities now have sort of like coding groups that you can join and do coding problems and that kind of thing. But to make it a push towards more climate focused work, then there is the opportunity to be able to suggest projects for those kind of groups. I know Eventbrite does quite a few sort of meetups and that kind of thing where you can suggest projects of things that you might want to work on. So that's always a good place to start.
Awesome. Yeah, so a real range of backgrounds from people, from a couple of academics into data science, sort of fleeing the finance sector, James. I've been mostly with nonprofits for the last 10 years. But I mean, I would say that very mostly, like outside of large organizations, there's not that many sort of green clean tech orgs where like the real value comes from sort of better models and data science. So some examples are like energy asset management on the power sector, like optimizing, battery charging and discharging in electricity markets. Like that's, really model based, like very hardcore sort of data science and analytics. But a lot of other things are not. And so it can be a harder fit to say, I want to do data science, but in this, in this field that doesn't have like a really easy way for it to slot in. And I mean, so sometimes you then have to sort of do some volunteering or get involved in something that doesn't have an obvious like data science component, and then work out where you can apply analytics. And I mean, a vast amount of stuff has a like public persuasion component or campaigning component. And these days with sort of marketing and targeting tools and things, you can go very deep very quickly in terms of trying to understand how things are being perceived, how your messages are coming across. So I would say in the main, like, yeah, it's full-time roles, but in terms of finding ways where you can add value, I would say don't necessarily put the data science first. So you find something that aligns with your own values and interests you and you care about. And then once you're in there, then try and spin out aspects in terms of data and data science modeling projects. My 2 cents. Work on climate and climateaction.tech have a great resource called Climate Fellows, where they curate like volunteering opportunities as well. So shout out for Climate Fellows. And James says, sounds like he can take some volunteers. Subak, we can sort of possibly take volunteers or direct them. So feel free to ping me. I'll drop my email in the chat as well. But George has asked another question. As the younger generation or millennials are now decision makers or almost decision makers, does this make things easier? This reminds me of the Thomas Kuhn and his Structures of Scientific Revolutions, if you know that one, around how science changes and paradigm shifts. Basically, the old guard die off or are no longer in power, and now of course we have climate aware leaders. Is that actually true though? Do we think that that's right? Who would speak up for that being true? And it's now all easy because all of the leaders are sort of get climate change. Open to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, this keys into one of the key topics at the moment around climate justice and the inequality of people that emit carbon, both within nations, rich versus poor, and across nations, developed versus developing. And the fact that for the younger generation, who, just like the developing countries, have not really been the people who have generated the enormous cumulative amount of emissions in the air, but they are the people who are going to be bearing most of the consequences. So is it making things easier? Well, in some ways, yes, because they're bringing their voice to bear. And again, you saw that at COP, the difference between what was going on inside the conference center with pledges and sort of patting on the back and lots of rhetoric, and then outside where you had huge demonstrations about the fact that things just weren't going quickly enough, obviously led by Greta Thunberg. So I think, yeah, it definitely helps that voice is getting louder, but it's not nearly enough yet. However, what we're starting to see is that some of the organizations we're working with, we're actually brought in by that younger generation, by the millennials, by the people in their 20s who actually feel that working for a firm where sustainability is at its core is a necessary condition of employment now. And that's really great. Is it anywhere near to that sort of great tipping point where the people in, you know, at the top, the big decision makers, whether they're political or corporate, are sort of have the same kind of view? No, not yet, unfortunately.
Maybe I think to add to this, even so we see these basically a large share of young people on the streets, I think it's important not to make it a generational thing. Because we just don't have the time to wait for the young people getting into the top position. And I'm also optimistic that this is not needed because I see a lot of change in mindset in the industry. Especially in the petrochemical sector, there are many companies who are and their business models are based on fossil fuels. But even there, in all the different age groups, you see those people who are maybe not that much in times with the climate discussion, and those people who are really fighting for it every day. And I think this is important to acknowledge that there are a lot of older, experienced people who now changed into transforming their business to sustainable business models. So I think everyone needs to work together. I mean, 2030, we need to cut emissions by half. That's only 10 years, less than 10 years.
Angus, Victoria, what do you reckon?
I think it's similar to what Arne was saying. So not really waiting for the younger generation to sort of make the decisions as well, because even when the younger generation gets to the point of making the decisions, I think there's always more that can be done. I don't think, in terms of climate change, I don't think we'll ever sort of done enough, shall we say, and we can all just sit back and relax. Because I mean, as population rises, it's going to be a demand for better and better tech. We're a society that's currently was wanting more and more. So we need to be able to produce more and meet these demands without using any more energy. So I think it'll always be something that's beyond our minds.
Awesome. All right. Look, yeah, Angus, go for it quickly.
No, I was just going to add that I have seen a change personally. I've seen as I've moved through work, there's been a sort of less and less resistance building up, and less emphasis on making a choice because it's economically viable, but things are starting to move towards making a choice because it's with regards to emissions, it's viable. With regards to reducing yearly emissions and making your company, making it very clear that it's sustainably minded, and a green company has become a lot more important than when I first started working. So I don't know whether this is due to young people or not. I've just noticed that it has changed.
Perfect. Well, I think that brings us to end on an optimistic note. I mean, we've heard lots of sort of positive tools for sort of making changes to tackle emissions. Obviously, it's a huge job to go and to speed up, but I think totally fine to have a little bit of optimism. Thanks so much to all the speakers, to Arne, to James, to Angus and Victoria. Really cool companies, and your work is really exciting. Thanks so much to Data Science Festival and Data Idols. This session is recorded and it'll be available online afterwards. And thanks for your questions. So everyone, take care and see you next time.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.